Hello and welcome to Newsnight, where we talk to major players in Nigeria's journey to growth and development. I am Ladi Akeredoluwale. Thank you for being with us today. The crisis in Nigeria's tertiary education system could have been avoided if the university lecturers themselves had previously taken the time to look at the environment and come up with a process that will sustain it over the long haul. My guest on the program today also thinks the security situation in the country has already made a challenged position on many matters much worse. Newsnight talks to Nigeria's only Nobel laureate, the octogenarian elder statesman, writer, and human rights icon, Professor Oluwole Soyinka. Prof, it's a pleasure to be with you once again. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
And in such good health.
Yeah, leave that one aside.
Of course, I must start with a condolence.
Thank you.
And then congratulations.
Thank you.
You weren't in. There were a lot of people who were waiting for you, incidentally, for your birthday.
I was escaped.
Yes, I kind of got that, that you actually escaped. You do that anytime you have the opportunity.
Yeah, okay.
Let's begin from where we are. The most recent thing is the Osun State polls. And I'm a bit surprised to read that you mentioned that Chief Bola Ige's voice resounded. Mm-hmm. That stood in contrast to the PDP, which you called a nest of vipers, and which in fact won the election. Could you elaborate on that? What exactly did you mean?
Well, let's begin with the nest of vipers. How many years ago was that?
21 now.
Well, quite a few years. Now, the two parties have become very confusing to start with. Members have moved across so much. Those who started the APC, for instance, Breakaway, I know them very well. I'm very familiar with them. The people whose integrity I recognize because I know the principles on which they left. People like Audu Ogbe, for instance, we don't hear much of these days. I hope he's okay. People like Amechi, for instance. I know I was aware of the circumstances. And so there was a distinction, there was a difference. You could actually say, basically. But there's been so much intermarriage. The bloodline has diluted in many aspects, been polluted in many aspects. It even got to a stage, I believe, where a prominent member of the APC actually articulated the sentiment of, oh, come and join us and all your sins will be forgiven. I hope you remember that. And things like that, indicative of the reality that was actually going on. So it didn't surprise me too much. I was alarmed, shocked. It didn't surprise me too much when I found that somebody who had been so heavily implicated in the death of a prominent member of that party, Bola Ige, who's in effect one of the founding members, if not the actual original mind of that party, that his memory should be so trashed by consorting even with one of the prominent figures who featured in events, forget whether he was innocent of the actual crime or not, that's irrelevant. He was heavily implicated in the humiliation of that individual, that founding member of the party, who was also the Minister of Justice of this nation, and who has such a political record of both activism as a normal human civilian, as well as a politician. And to actually catapult one of those prime suspects and contributors and proven contributors to the elimination, in the sense that his action virtually declared Bola Ige free game for anyone. And to find that person there and being given a position in that party, in governance, and after the president of the nation, who's supposed to be the head of the party of some sort, had actually inaugurated a re-examination of that entire episode, among others, other crimes. That was quite a bit of a shock. And as I mentioned at the time, this for me was sacrilege, and also a laceration of the memories of those who were close to him and those who worked with him, who believed in him. And so, and remember, this Osun is Bola Ige's state.
Home state.
I think I've contributed even more to Osun State in many aspects than to my own state, Ogun, because of Bola. Maybe Lagos also comes next on the line because they had projects to which they invited me. But even more than my own state, I think I've contributed a lot more to Osun State, possibly than my own state. And so I consider it my state, my second home. And when the results began to come in, I just returned. It was like a welcome present for me, as I saw that party being punished for that act of sacrilege.
While you were away also, of course, the whole brouhaha over the Muslim ticket of the same party came to light, and that is still generating quite a lot of heated debate, and quite a number of people are surprised that almost 30 years after we last had a Muslim ticket, of course, that ended tragically with the June 12 debacle. But do you really think there's much in this debate, knowing you for who you are? Is there really much in this debate, especially if we're talking about religion and religious sentiments?
You know, that's a very difficult question. Difficult only because it sort of turns one into a split personality, if you like. But one really isn't. They're always humanity. A human being is disposed towards, at least those who are rational, who believe in actually reasoning things out. There's nothing strange about one holding simultaneously two conflicting opinions, depending on how you express them and what are the circumstances. Right. In principle, you know me very well. I don't give a damn if the president, vice president, speaker, etc., if they all come from the same village, they have the same religion, they belong to the same tribe, they marry, intermarry, or whatever. If, however, it is transparently, absolutely unarguable that is a kind of genius, a genius breed which has been donated to the nation and to the world. As long as the capability of every individual who's pulled into governance is proven and is quite clear, and you say there's no alternative. That's my position. It's always been my position. In fact, it'd be so nice because then the rest of us can just go about the rest of our business quietly, not bother about governance. Now we're talking about a society which is normal, where situations are normal. Is this society normal? In fact, sometimes I've come to the point to say, is Nigeria normal? Is it the norm? Is the average Nigerian today even the norm? Because if it is, this whole globe would have perished ages ago. The creator, those who believe in it, would have said, I've had enough of this. So even the average Nigerian is not the norm. Certain special circumstances which drive people to take decisions which normally, objectively, one would say is not acceptable. And take a country like Lebanon, which has this arrangement among themselves, in which the president comes from here, another officer comes from here, and that's been working ever since, because they learned from their civil war. And this is the best arrangement they could come up with. I have been instrumental in sending some of our young people to go and study the situation over there in an arrangement with my foundation, with the university, Cedar University in Lebanon. Because that's an example, that's one instance. And in this country, even the military seem to recognize the need to express the plurality, not merely of ethnic groups, but of faith in their own governance. I mean, take, for instance, IBB. He had first Okuye, replaced him with his running mate at the time, quote unquote.
ICOMO.
Then ICOMO, very good friend of mine when he was there. We used to talk quite a lot. And so a kind of sensibility has been expressed, even under some military dictatorships. Not all, but I know. And we've had, almost by unspoken arrangement, a recognition of the peculiarity of this particular society. And so it shouldn't surprise you or me that a number of people find that kind of choice very questionable and unwise, especially at this time. I can understand that perfectly. And at the same time, I recognize the rights of the proposed incumbent to choose whom he wants to run with, if he gets ultimately into power. That right is there. However, that right is not also absolute, because we're talking about a very relative society, which Nigeria is right now. And so we're in a very difficult situation. And the question I ask is, why create a controversy? Are there options which would have prevented such a controversy? As they say in certain societies, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And if that kind of arrangement has proven not maleficent for society, why tamper with it? Why not be sensitive to the very peculiar circumstances of Nigeria? But me, it's not my problem. But I just think it's unfortunate that the argument has been elevated. When in the midst of a crisis of faiths, of distrust, ethnic distrust, religious distrust, class distrust, and anything which can be done or any action which can be avoided so that that kind of distrust is not exacerbated, I think politicians should seize the opportunity of not exacerbating the debate. That's all I want to say on this subject. I know what I believe inside of me, but I also know what I recognize as the very peculiar circumstances of Nigerian society at this time. And I want to leave it at that.
Many in your shoes would be pained that in 2022, we still are discussing this and not discussing the initial thing you said, which is that it doesn't matter where this person comes from, what he professes, and so on. But we are.
Yeah.
That presupposes perhaps that the politicians have learned nothing, and therefore the people, their followers, have also learned nothing. How difficult is it for someone like you to internalize that, especially because from 1966, you've been in the trenches against this, and still, now, you are in the trenches against this. Only the characters have changed.
Yes.
The points are still there. I shudder to think how people like you look at it. Some of your colleagues or immediate juniors have simply given up and just walked off. But you haven't.
You know something? The first admission I must make is that very often I've said to myself, you have an option, walk off. I found it impossible to blame my colleagues who've given up on this nation. I find absolutely impossible. Look at where we're seated now. There are certain aspects of the history of this place which many people do not know. Before this house was completed, perhaps, I'm saying before it was fully roofed, before all the doors were there, IBB had lunch here, right here, when he was president.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
We seized him, we took hold of him, kidnapped him,
Yes.
according to the Alaki. He said, in our presence, they came, Wale Soyinka came and kidnapped IBB. Yes, we did. But with his consent, of course, we arranged it. Said, come through that door. I said, there are people I want you to meet, to talk to. People who hate your gods and those who approve of some. But it's important for you to seize every opportunity to exchange ideas from those who normally do not appear. So I brought here, we had lunch in this place, catering somewhere else. We spoke a number of things. I went with him to his Soyinka to meet Ogutuga, because I wanted him to see the production which is going there and see what could be done to encourage that kind of productivity, which is very good for the economy. And of course, I met him a number of other times, so here also...
He's been your friend, actually, Prof.
IBB?
Yes.
I have a soft spot for IBB.
Of all the heads of state we've had.
But I criticize, but let's not talk about my criticism of him right now. Otherwise, we won't stop.
He did.
But right here, also there, the honor of Ife, the honor of coming here to have dinner with me to discuss some very serious national issues. At the end of it, we issued a communique. Why did he come? I told him, I'm not coming to your place again, your palace, because I want to talk to you outside your comfort zone. So when you're ready, we'll meet somewhere, we'll talk, but I'm not coming to your palace anymore. To my astonishment, he just said, I'm on my way, I'm coming to see you. And we sat here, just four of us. I had two other people, he had one person with him, and we discussed the Nigerian situation. So Chief Adebo has been here, had been when she was alive, again, because he never let me rest. Any problem, any contradiction, anything, we say, used to call Wale Temi. The writers, you study people and so on. How can this person be doing such a thing? How is it possible for a head of state to act in this way? I'm on my way, right here. And of course, I've had less, shall we say, salubrious visitations, like burglars.
Yes.
Who came here and convinced till today that there were security agencies. They made 3 attempts, eventually succeeded when I wasn't here. Once they came right through, there's a kind of grill over there. You see a new grill. Those grills were not there originally. And they couldn't make, fortunately, unfortunately, heaven knows how this would have turned up. I was woken up in time, and anyway, they left, let's put it that way. So they succeeded in the end while I was in Benin lecturing. They took away, and they also raided me in Lagos. What were they looking for? They were looking for anything that could hold records. They took away in the Lagos house iPads, iMac, whatever, laptops, anything at all, phones. The police came. Later on, even the DSS came. They even took photographs. They came, inspected this place. They took photographs with me over there, Till today, I haven't had one response. 4 attempts, 1 successful, in which this place was cleaned, including my guns, hunting guns, belonging not just to me, but my hunting, the people they used to keep their guns with me. This place was cleaned out. Until today, the police who came here, who took notes, took some fingerprints in Lagos. They have not been able to give me a response. And they were raiding this place because they thought I had some material. That is why they came with those recording machines. And so, sorry, I didn't mean to go into it.
No,
I got carried away.
You're setting the
I got carried away by it.
You're setting the background for why you really cannot stay away.
Yeah, precisely. And each time that happened, I said, how is it possible, as to stick to that negative one, how is it possible in this period of crisis, security crisis, that a house, a home of mine will be raided, guns taken, several rounds of ammunition of various calibers, because different guns, different hunters and so on, carried away, and the police cannot even just do the courtesy of informing. They told me at one time, oh, they transferred it to SARS. That was when SARS was still there, and it was in Abuja, and so on. And no response. So it becomes a do-it-yourself thing. And I said, okay, no problem. I've always been a do-it-yourself man. I'll take care of my own security. I don't want police around me. I don't trust them. Mind you, at the same time, some of them are great. In fact, I can tell you, some of us, myself included, owe our current existence simply to the loyalty of the police, to our cause, a belief in what we stood for, and therefore they were able to help us out of some very tight spots. So let me not condemn, blanket. I don't like doing that. I just want to say that as an institution, our security services today are to be approached with a long pole. It's dining with the devil. So the question from time to time is, yes, what am I still doing here? I intervene. When I can't meet heads of state physically, I phone them on critical issues. Whether you're saying Obasanjo, you're taking IPOB, you're taking Jonathan. I've never phoned Buhari, but I have met him one-on-one,
Yes,
which I took a message to him from one of the embattled. Well, they said, who trusted me? He said, I was the only one they would trust to deliver this message when I met him. The others, I would pick up a phone and call them and talk. This very house, are you aware that for over a year, the Legislative House of Ogun State was locked up,
Yes.
barricaded, manned by the police, etc., just like Fayose did in Ekiti. Under whose watch was that? It was under Jonathan's watch. And I picked up my phone and called him, especially when he appointed the person responsible for that abomination, Benga Daniels, when he appointed him, his head of campaign, his campaign manager. I picked up the phone and I said, what message are you sending? You're appointing as your campaign manager somebody who has desecrated the sanctity of the civic will through election. The legislators were running helter-skelter, and they used to come here and meet me to discuss what to do, how to force that place open by law, whatever means, and so on and so forth. The day I called a town meeting on this issue, after failing to get satisfaction from Jonathan, I called him. I said, oh, remember what you said? He said, oh, you mean they haven't solved that problem yet? I said, what? Mr. President, you're asking, we haven't solved that problem. That place has been locked up on the authority of the government, using the police. I said, okay, thank you very much. When I called the town meeting, I had to go through this back place here, walk through and have a car meet me on the other side, simply because we're informed that governor's thugs were waiting to prevent. I went to the police before the meeting, police commissioner. I said, this is the information we have about the town meeting, and so on and so forth. So when people talk about Soyinka installing Buhari, they're talking rubbish. They don't know what they're talking about. They're talking from ignorance. And so when I think about it, when I think not merely of governance, when I think of the governed themselves, I ask myself, what am I doing among these people? That they don't understand that if somebody misrules, you have a right to tell people not to vote for him. And it's their business after that, who they vote for. But they have the option also of spoiling their votes. And so when I hear Wole Soyinka was the one who installed Buhari, and he should apologize to the nation. I say, your parents should apologize to the world for inflicting morons like you on the world. So that accumulation of negativity from governing, and to the governed, I can tell you numerous times when I've been outside, I say, I think maybe I'll just stay here for at least for a while longer. So you are absolutely right. However, sorry, I didn't mean to go so long.
Please.
I'm just saying you're right to ask that question. I don't want anybody to have any mistake about it. That yes, from often it has occurred to me. Okay, the most recent, leave Wole Soyinka aside now. A group who call themselves some Sharia people, they've just sentenced some men to death, to be stoned to death for alleged homosexuality. My feeling when I read that was, oh my God, déjà vu. Here we go again. I was in Italy when Safiyat, remember?
Yes.
The woman was sentenced to be stoned to death by this group of religious fanatics. I was in Italy. I remember giving interviews there at the time and also telling off some so-called intellectuals, liberal intellectuals in Italy who said, we have no right to intervene in people's beliefs and religions and so on. I said, please shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. Because by that time, I'd said, I made up my mind, and I made it clear, I stated publicly, if that woman was stoned to death, I would tear up my Nigerian passport. I will never return, not on the spot, but I would never return to Nigeria. And the same thing is happening. How many years after? A group of people think they have the power of life and death under a system they call the Sharia to sentence men to death, to be stoned to death, because in their view they have committed some kind of abomination. So what sort of a country is it? How can one love a country like that, in which such arbitrary disposition of human beings becomes second nature? Go back to Isiomia Daniel, the same thing. I know what we did to try and help her resettle her outside. Eventually it was the Swedish government took over and all that. So what sort of a people? And we accept this. Again and again, we're put through the same trauma of various numerous systems supposedly governing one single national entity. So you're right. Very often I say, I have a choice. I can walk off. Don't ask me why I haven't. I think it's just laziness. The idea of uprooting completely and starting all over again. And in any case, what I call the honorable spots of the world shrink by the day. Would you have anticipated Putin,
invading Ukraine,
bombarding civilians with such fiendish glee? Supermarkets lobbing rockets. And what is Ukraine's crime? I said, leave me to associate with whoever I want. And ask myself, what is the difference between Putin and the herdsmen who cover the land of farmers? And they invade at night, they kill cow, they slaughter, they burn grain, scatter the farmers, the families completely, render them homeless overnight. They and Putin should get together. The same mentality, the same breed. So when you say you live here, you go somewhere else, the next thing you know, another Putin, where you're sitting, can be start lobbying somewhere.
But when the most recent outrage occurred in the Southwest, in the case of Owo, when the Catholic Church, you went to visit the governor of Ondo State, and you said something to him which so many people said needed further elucidation. You said, you know that we know who these are. They're sending us a message. We've got that message.
Well, that's part of your answer, you see, is that my temperament does not accept easily that anyone should chase me out of my God-given earth. So it's a temperamental thing as well. The idea that you can unleash terror on me because you want my little patch of territory, or you want my soul. That is, you want to subjugate me. You want to turn me into a slave. Well, I will sort that out first, and then I'll make up my mind whether I want to leave. So each outrage, unfortunately, has the opposite effect. Whether the outrage is taking place in Benue, whether it's taking place in Kaduna, whether it's taking place in Owo, or whether it's taking place right here, along the border. You know, we've been subjected also to this lunacy of this subjugation mentality, which some minority people hold. And I find it very difficult to accept to be chased out of my own entitled portion of the earth. So ultimately,
how much of this would you put down to a lack of understanding of history? That is, in our own part of the world, a lot of people don't read. A lot of those who read for the purpose of passing exams and getting certificates. Once that's done, they're no longer interested. So most of the time, you have the vast part of the population not able to look back, see that this has happened before, seen the result, and therefore, upon seeing something similar about to happen again, are able to say, hey, hold on. We've seen this before, something you referred to as deja vu earlier. How much, because I've spoken to a couple of people who have said, there's a nexus between our lack of literacy, our lack of understanding of history, and where we are as a country. That because no country grows beyond the education or the literacy of its people.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting that you use the word history. Yeah, many people just either do not know history or do not understand the purpose of history. And then there's a different group also who are very selective about history. They know how to distort or misuse history. Take, for instance, when this incursion of the Fulani herdsmen began, and the Miyetti Allah, their spokesman, said in Borno, I think it was in Borno, said, we once ruled this place, and we can take back our land anytime we want. Remember that statement? Never forgotten it. In the midst of this, the harrowing, the trauma of these people, somebody comes gloating and then citing a selective portion of history. Last time I was a criminal, and I said it at the time. I said, this person should be arrested and locked up. Who says he wants to repeat this history of conquest? He's actually doing it. He's admitting either knowledge before, after, or support anyway. And I ask the question, so why are you, isn't there anything like hate speech anymore? Why are you proscribing IPOB without proscribing Miyetti Allah? Whose spokesman dares approve the killing, the dispossession of people? Who's choking off our breadbasket, at least one of the directions of the feeding of this nation, chasing farmers of their nation, creating a situation of food scarcity, one of the biggest security threats you can launch against any people, either internally or internally. So that's also a way of knowing history, but disowning history, because you only take a small portion, you disown the rest of it. It doesn't exist. Again, if I may cite Putin, the same thing with Putin. Putin saying to the Ukrainians, you are once part of us. We have a right to continue to dominate you anytime and to take you back anytime we want. What kind of human beings will accept that? Ukrainians are proving themselves one of the most courageous people at the moment. But it's interesting that you should raise the issue of history, because I would like to use every opportunity to ask, who was it that actually terminated the teaching of history in schools? Do you know that many of us didn't know for a long time that history was no longer being taught in schools? It was only a casual statement by Fashola at one time, I remember. I had to phone him. I said, wait a minute. I heard you said something the other day. Are you sure you have your facts right? He said, go and check. The history has been removed from the school curriculum. So now, those who removed that, they weren't fools. When I made inquiries, they said, oh, there were not enough teachers. Absolute balderdash. I mean, it was an insulting kind of excuse. No, they just did not want history to be taught, especially contemporary history. They didn't want people to know and learn from our recent history. Things that led up to the Civil War, the conduct of the military during the Civil War. And they're just cutting their noses to spite their faces, because there were also positive aspects. There were certain lessons learned here and there, you know, from that episode. Even the attitude of governance at the time, even though this was more observed in the breach than in the observance, no vanquished, no conquerors, no victors, at least some, you know, token rhetorical, shall we say, amelioration of situation existed. We can learn from that and improve on that and build on that. And maybe if we're done, we wouldn't have IPOB today. Maybe we would never have had MEND. If we learned from that.
Things that had happened before, Prof. Because in the, when you mentioned IPOB, what again came to my mind was your trip to Biafra ahead of the start of the Civil War in 1967
Yes.
to meet then Lieutenant Colonel Odumego Ojukwu.
Yes, I went across the Biafra.
Yeah. And here we are again. In spite of what you just said about the tokenism and all of that. Here we are, 30, 40 years, those who mostly, because again, it was pointed out that most of the most fervent agitators now were those who didn't witness that.
That's right.
And again, it comes back to the question of history, that because they don't know anything about that, and therefore there are no lessons to pick because they don't know.
Yeah, I was very desperate for that war not to happen. First, I thought, I believe till today, it was a wrong war. War is wrong to start with, but this one was particularly bad because the Igbo people, no question at all, were, there was no other word for it, genocide. They underwent the experience of genocide. When the people have undergone that traumatizing, the memory congeals. It congeals, especially towards the immediacy, but it can burst out again any other time. And so when I made statements at the time that you can never defeat Biafra, many people took a very simplistic reading of that. They thought I was referring just to the battlefield. No, I was talking about the idea. The idea has taken hold. And the idea has taken hold of some of those who don't know the full history. Because the Igbo people were not themselves blameless, totally. And when I met Ojukwu, we spoke very, very frankly. And when I met him, when I went and met him in Ivory Coast, we spoke again about the mistakes. I asked him questions like, for instance, why did you shoot Victor Banjo and all the others? He gave what his answers were and so on and so forth. Not very satisfactory. And then since then, I met him again And when I did this program for BBC Channel 4, it's called Journeys. And I captured the journey to Biafra. I interviewed Gowon, Ojukwu, the Achuzia, and all those who were involved in the wars. I have all the tapes.
Again, a look back at history.
Precisely. And these were reminders. And if the lessons of the past, and that means history, consciousness of history, a rational, reasoned consciousness of history, is adopted, is inculcated in schools, you wouldn't have people talking so glibly about the possibility of another war. You'd have people more inclined, as some are, to dialogue. And there are some individuals like that. On the Igbo side, on this side, you've had the session, Hands Across the Niger, Hands Across the Benue, Hands Across Nigeria. These are people who are very history conscious. Ikewachukwu, Ezefe, etc., etc. They're history conscious. And so they don't want the same errors to take place. And you have these movements. One took place in the States, and others have taken place in Lagos. And so you're quite right, the necessity to not just teach history in schools, but to make history part and parcel of civic consciousness all the time, in numerous ways. And I think even the cinema has a role to play in this. Instead of making all those Nollywood films, you can do some really remarkable teaching and yet entertaining films, but that's another story.
No, but it is part of the story, because I was going to point out that this was something at which you excelled. You were a member, you led, you formed several of these groups where some of your plays and some of other plays, some of your books, many of us who, in growing up, possibly couldn't understand the books, went to see some of those plays and got a deeper understanding. There was always the lesson from it. I remember particularly The Lion and the Drum. Read the story several times, but still couldn't. But then when you went to watch it, when it was pictorially represented, it was a different ballgame. That is all but dead now. Again, as an attribute of history.
No, it's not all dead. There's a very vital young crop of dramatists who are revisiting these things. I remember reading quite a number of scripts. Unfortunately, not very many of them, satisfactorily written. But it's amazing how that event, Lagos at 50, threw up a number of interesting writers, dramatists. Some of them I've had here in my annex, in my program, who are working on their plays. And they're quite history conscious. Unfortunately, there isn't enough artistic support from where we should be having them business. They try, not small, as we say, but not sufficiently.
But that then gives us, let me bring you to something else equally important, which people would say, look, why are we surprised? Two things have happened more recently. Again, going back to the issue of the nexus between literacy and development. The universities have, to quote Professor Adebayo Williams, all but collapsed. They're standing only because of the physical structures. What in most people's minds constitutes universities has left. On the other hand, you have the advent of online media, which has taken away completely the discipline required, and which was why we had libraries, and people had to go physically and go look at books and actually read and reread to understand. Those twin happenings have also had their impact. As we speak, Prof, many of the universities have been closed for 5 months, if not more, in Nigeria, the federal ones in particular. If we are to add the previous closures over the last 5 years, they've probably been closed for more than half the period. So those two things are also happening, and therefore the products that come out, you talk about plays and written not particularly satisfactorily. Who's teaching?
Yeah, well, you know, the universities, I'm not going to say much about that for the simple reason that many years ago, I offered a solution, and that solution now has become even more urgent. I proposed, I said, universities, close yourselves down. Come together for a massive congregation, but close yourselves down for a year, and then have a congregation made up of faculty, student representations, workers, stakeholders, etc., in which we redefine what we understand by a university. We define our vision of what a university should be, given the present circumstances. Then we agree on a set of university laws, which will be generated from within the university, not dictated from outside, so that it becomes our own thing, so to speak. We create a new adaptive culture, university culture, collegial spirit. I made that proposal. I said, close yourselves down for a number of years. What did I get? They said, I'm speaking for the government. I said, listen, I didn't say the government should close down. You already have the autonomy. You have the power, the right to come together and say, we want, with what is happening right now. I remember this was from the time of Babangida. We're going back so many years now. Now, if that proposition had been accepted, add together the number of months universities have closed down since then, add them together, amount to years. So during that period, the students will go and do their national youth service. You know, whether first year, second year, we find them places all over, while the national university congregation meets and decides its future. What you have now is piecemeal, agitation here and there, going over the same sports all over again. If it's not allowances today, it's payment tomorrow. If it's not condonation of services, if it's all this. And the students, the young generation, lose a very valuable part of their lives. They keep starting all over again. So, there's only a holistic approach for me to universities. The crisis will not be solved by meetings between ASU and Ngige or whoever happens to be Minister of Labor. It will not be solved by Minister of Education or whatever department. The cure will take place when universities say, wait a minute, we are an autonomous entity. And they will meet, discuss, and even up to how to generate funds and become more independent, less dependent on governance. That's why I use the word stakeholder. I added the stakeholders, those who will contribute to the life, the survival of the universities. So much for that university. You don't want to close down, okay. Today's students will close you down. Tomorrow, the workers will. Day after, it'll be ASU. Everybody will be on permanent vacation, okay. And the government will sit down there laughing and enjoying, because they don't want, very often, they don't want university culture. They don't really want people to understand even their own history. So that's it. Now, that monster called social media, I'm very glad you raised it. I don't know what you people are going to do about it, but I've said again and again that maybe a third world war will be started by the social media. It is the most devastating distortion of a beautiful technology that I've ever witnessed. The conversion, the malconversion of human genius, because it is genius, internet. And it's proven its positive aspects. It was responsible, for instance, for the Arab Spring, remember? So, but those who dominate that social media, just take, again, let's get personal my watchers, my team, and so on, who've taken this on themselves, they've succeeded in closing down at least 30 fake Wole Soyinka platforms. I don't Facebook, I don't blog, I don't tweet. I keep away from this. And yet, time and time again, a new Wole Soyinka platform appears. Nigerians, you can guarantee Nigerians. We close them down. Some, it had to be physical threat. After we tracked the
location.
I said, I know your house. I know your papa's house. You had that closer. He said, oh, he had this green badge. You know, how they got it from Google or whatever. I said, well, I get that green, I'll ram it down your throat. You close that thing down. We tracked that all the way to Bosnia. That was his address, next to a petrol station, a waste. That was the address of the owner of this Wole Soyinka thing. And so they put words in your mouth. They create friction where necessary. They create enmities. Instead of using this instrument as an instrument of learning and genuine communication, improvement, suggestions, no. All they do is go there and just, they think it's a plaything. And they think insulting, right, left, and center, concocting, manufacturing, constantly. They've killed me over, I don't know, I've celebrated my obituary, I don't know here. Each time I read it, I go and take my best bottle of, I say, let me drink this before it becomes true. You know, it's a problem. It's a mammoth problem. And it's one, I'm very glad that governments like the US government are tackling the originators, Facebook, etc., saying, you have to do something about this Frankenstein. You have to somehow find solutions before serious damage is done to communities. Because it can be a great tool for community cohesion, you know, interaction. So the opportunities are there. And of course, there are those who use this positively for what it's meant. But the point you're making, that it's driving illiteracy to the heights, is incontestable. Because the new generation, they take the easy way out for expression, self-expression, rather than learning that self-expression itself is a discipline. It's something which you practice, which you perfect, and which you use positively, and which can even become lucrative. And some of them are succeeding in that, actually. They open pages with which people advertise and so on. And that's the way this instrument should be used. So who is going to teach them and who is going to cure them? Let me give you something which happened to me recently. I came through London on my way from Canada, and I stayed a couple of days. And I went for my morning fix, my espresso fix in a cafe right next to where I was. So when I was drinking my coffee, I heard some people speaking Yoruba. I listened, because when I came in, I didn't see any black person there. So I went over with my coffee. Then the question went on again. And we go, tó bá ti gba owó yẹn o, kò sáré gbé fún ẹni bá bá o, má gbé lọ sí ibẹ̀ yẹn. Right, I'm saying this about a week ago in Chelsea, in London. Then I made a mistake, unfortunately. So I looked up because I thought, was I hallucinating? It was a half and half, whom I thought was an Oyibo, half white, half black. It was he performing 419 on his laptop. So it was he alone on his laptop, phone on one side, and that boy was as crooked as the shepherd staff, as ever. And I knew he was crooked because I think he suddenly was aware, I think the way I looked up sharply, and he wondered, this.
He didn't recognize you.
Yeah, he didn't know. I had my, I go.
Oh, okay.
I had my disguise.
Because I was going to say that would have proved to be.
I enjoy my anonymity when I travel. I have all kinds of disguises. So but he knew, like he suspected, I must have caught on something. He never spoke another word. I bought another coffee, which I
Hoping
didn't,
for him to say
hoping for
something.
him to continue, so I could locate him. That was a Nigerian, a Yoruba, performing his 419. Many of them think 419 was invented for them to make money, to make matches, defraud, so that's our problem today. Illiteracy and crookdom as the only domain worth inhabiting.
Prof, just a couple of days ago, I read something, and the person who wrote it said, we would have lost you to journalism if that had worked out. So, thank goodness it didn't.
If what had worked out?
You went for an interview.
Uh-huh. Oh, yes.
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 And you were asked to write.
Yes.
And long after others had finished and left, you were still writing until the vigilator said, look, I have to get my lunch. Look, whatever it is you're writing, give it to me. Because you went on and on about the background of the persons involved, the histories and so on, which later on, for what you became, would now make sense. But at that time, you wanted to be a journalist.
Yes, indeed.
Thank goodness you didn't.
I went for that interview, virtually straight from school, maybe about a year after I saw this. So I went there, and it was this assignment that somebody had done something somewhere, go over there and cover it and so on. So I didn't mean to cover more than a page, but I was enjoying all the twists and turns, and I sat there, until I saw this figure looming over my head. Just, what's wrong with you? Did I ask you to come and write a book? Anyway, so I failed that journalistic test. I didn't even give me back my script. Maybe I could have had it published.
Maybe you could have turned it into something. But then you went on, Prof, later on, another story. You wrote your PhD thesis. And then you decided it was too good to submit as an academic work. You turned it into a book.
No, don't mind them. It's part of mythology.
Okay.
What happened was this. Let me tell you the story, because people have...
people have said that so many times.
I made up my mind I was not going to do, I didn't want to do a PhD. And I told my professors, they wanted me to. And then, I remember it was Professor Jeffers, felt that at least I should do something. And he then instituted the MA in 1 year rather than 2 years. I was impatient to go and start my writing. They said, okay, at least you can do your, you do a long essay and you'll do a test and so on and so forth. A group of us like that. Tony Harrison was another one, the poet, who taught here.
Yeah,
I remember it was one of them. I think he too didn't finish his own. So anyway, along the way, what am I wasting my time on this one? So, what is that? So I sat there when they came back. It's not a long story. But no, I never actually, later on, I then decided to do research into drama because I wanted to set up my own company, and I also generally wanted to research traditional forms of theater. But I was able to get the fellowship because they assumed I would write a PhD. So maybe that's the other one I walked away from. I call myself a doctoral dropout.
But then, of course, you went on to get a professorship,
yes,
which was...
And, I got an MA somewhere.
Very few people do that, again, or are able to do that. Don't get a PhD and then go on to become professors, particularly from here.
Yeah. Well, I'd always been, there's this, I'm not just a creative person, there's this intellectual aspect to my makeup. And so I kept that alive through essays, through lecturing, and eventually wrote a book, Myth, Literature, and the African World, and so on, all of which generally go into consideration for professorship, depending on what kind of university it is. There's some universities which won't touch you if you don't have a PhD. Yeah. On the other hand, one of my professors, G. Wilson Knight, never even got the first degree. And he got a professorship right away on the basis of his works on Shakespeare. So it's all a question of scholarship, how you want to do it. But there was no way I would ever write a book with all those long footnotes, with the footnotes are longer than the materials. Look at it. I say, what's all this? Where's the text? Everything is footnotes. No, that wasn't for me.
But there was a difference when you started writing. Most of what you wrote was incomprehensible to most people. And you said, yeah, that's the way it should be.
No,
You
I
didn't
never
want
said
it
that's the way it should be. No, maybe other people did. No, I never did. I always argued. I always said, no, it's comprehensible. You try and read it carefully. And I try to tell people, not all works are ingested at the same sitting. I'm a student of literature, and I went through, and I know books which I will leave for a while, then return later on. Please don't misunderstand me. I didn't set out to write that kind of books. I wrote the way I felt internally and used the kind of expressions which are my armory, and it's just, and then the ultimate argument, anyway.
Unique armory.
Eh?
Unique armory. Unique armory. Prof, because after you wrote books like let me not say books. After you wrote things like The Man Died, and but you wrote The Lion and the Jewel, which was, more interesting to read, especially for those whose comprehension level was not.
The Jero plays are not hard to follow.
But then you had things like Brother Jero's plays. But then maybe you mellowed in that determination when you wrote Ake, The Childhood Years. Now that was a book I saw many people hugging because they thought, aha, here's something that I can read, even though there were some of the phrases in there also that required dictionary interpretations, but it was a more interesting read.
But now it's interesting you say that. I had to wait a long time to write Ake. I had to wait that long time because I wanted to enter into the mind of the child as that child was at the time, I was writing about. And so I had to be patient. And it's just, I think one day something happened and I found I could re-enter that. Yes, I found I could re-enter that period and I began work on it. So creative works sort of operate in very often in that manner. There are those, mind you, who make up their mind from the very beginning, what they're going to write, how they're going to write, when they're going to write. They wake up in the morning. In those days with the typewriter, they put a sheet of paper. They don't get up from there until they've covered a few pages, making corrections, and they won't do more than those pages. There are those who work who build up, things build up inside for a long time, sometimes even years, and then they write in a white heat. It's the only way they can write. They wait until what you might call the critical mass, when the material can no longer be contained inside. I partially belong to that group. It's already formulating, gestating. So when people ask sometimes, how long did it take you to write that? I say years. In actual fact, it took maybe weeks. But it's been building up inside. You've been writing it, you've been listening to it, you've been meeting the characters, and then they're ready to burst out. It's a very remarkable and very varied process. I suppose that's what makes creative writing so fascinating for some of us.
And then you went on with that, thoroughly enjoying yourself, getting involved in the various endeavors you did, and then October 1986 happened, and that was interrupted. You were put on this stage, most unwillingly, dragged, kicking and screaming there. But you were also held up as a beacon because you would be the first African to win the Nobel Prize. At that time, it would appear as if people made more of it than you did. there were so many people who thought so much of that and how deserving you were of it, even before you were eventually given. But it seemed to you like the way you came across was like it was another day in the office.
Well, let's put it this way. I think prizes are good things. They're good for the occupation. They're very good. They encourage not just the recipient, but others. They boost them. They take what you're doing out of the ghetto, place it on, and place it in public space, a very different level of public space. So it's not that I'm against prizes. It's not that I'm blasé about prizes. I think prizes are important. As long as we don't think that they set you apart as a being. And for me, my entire struggle since the Nobel Prize has been to make sure that I retain as much of what I am, what I know I am, as possible. That I don't allow people to turn me into something else, into a Nobel Prize winner rather than Wole Soyinka. And that has been the real problem. It's not a light burden at all because you lose such a large portion of your anonymity. We were talking of disguises just now. People may think, well, it's not that it's bad to be noticed. It's not that it's bad to be admired, but it's also a nuisance sometimes. I mean, you want to hide. You
just want to go about things.
You want, you want to be able to enter into a sharp corner and eat some amala like some governors without being
noticed.
without being noticed. And this stops, and I resent it. And then, of course, with the explosion of cameras, oh my God. Can I have a selfie? Can I have a photo? Can I have this? I said, don't ask who, otherwise we'll fight. So, but there is, it's a mixed bag. Why should one deny it? It's a mixed bag. But for me, it shouldn't set one apart. One should now be treated as a guru. I've continued to do what I was doing before I won the Nobel Prize, only I do it more intensely and there's more spotlight on it and you have to be more cautious. And you then spend a lot of time trying to reassure people that you haven't suddenly grown horns and a tail and have hooves. You have to work at even putting people at their ease when they're with you. Some people, not all though. Others we just say, Baba, go to hell. Yeah,
well, some of that, of course, is envy.
Well, let's not even go in that direction. But I can name some.
I know. Yeah. I know you can from. But let me bring you back to this as we're winding this down now. Some say we've been a bit too hard on our country, in the sense that when everything is said and done, we've come a long way, and a lot of what has happened to the country is positive. We're not exactly where some thought we could be, and where others are, in fact. But we're also not where people believed we should be and we could be, given our endowments. So it's like a fine balancing act. Between 1999 and now, we've had the longest sustained period of civilian rule. I hesitate to call him your friend, but I'm fairly certain that I'm on surer ground if I say your sparring partner, General Obasanjo, started it off. And some said he put it on a sure footing until we had the third term thing towards the end. And then Umaru Yar'Adua, Goodluck Jonathan, and now Muhammadu Buhari. Your relationship with each has varied. But do you think that over the period, each succeeding administration has, for all the faults we can find, deepened democracy somewhat, even though they also left quite a bit of gaps. Would that be a fair assessment?
I think you have a point there, and to some extent you're also answering a question which we asked earlier. This is part and parcel of the reason why one ends up staying put. That there are the positives. One cannot go around existence living only on the negatives, looking only at the negatives. Let me say this, Nigerians have, I think, the highest percentage of capable, intelligent, and creative people anywhere in the world that I know of. I'm talking about percentage per population. If you look at the proportion, I meet us everywhere. We're into space. We have Nigerians who have contributed to components of some of those rockets which you see flying in space, who work with NASA. We have Nigerians who have sent up experiments which they carry out in space. I have myself, especially during my period of exile when I was moving all over the place lecturing, I met Nigerians whose work I've attempted and have even in some cases succeeded in bringing to the attention of the academics of the discipline. I remember taking the trouble to actually chase one Nigerian from the East who claimed that he found the cure for HIV AIDS. And I remember running home in excitement, calling my brother, my big brother was a doctor. I said, listen, I met somebody, etc., etc. What can be done with his work? He's in Paris, and we talked about it. And eventually, it turned out it wasn't quite the
cure.
What the cure? And I've had so many encounters like that. We have some of the finest surgeons in the world. I felt honored when I was invited to address the American Society of Surgeons when it was headed by a Nigerian doctor. You know, they didn't have to ask me twice. I was on the plane. A Nigerian head of Society of Surgeons. I'm there. and so encounters like that, knowledge of that kind, is also part of what keeps on going. I met young geniuses in various fields. Look at our achievements in the music field. I'm not a pop music fan, but I recognize talent within that department, and I always read all about them. I can't bear to listen to some of their music, let me tell you. But the important thing is they're succeeding, and those who understand that kind of music rate them very high. And the other kind of music which I prefer, jazz and so on, the same thing. So yes, that is also part of the answer to the question which you asked earlier, that we cannot, we shouldn't dwell too much on the negatives. But if the system of governance is such that all it does is lead to brain drain, then this negates all the attainments of these people, because this is the kind of talent that we need to build the nation. When we started Union of Writers of the African Peoples in Dakar, we created a sister organization, which is Union of African Researchers and Scientists, headed by Professor Shikanta Diop. And when you talk about my ding-dong with aspiring partners and so on, it's an opportunity also of giving some credit. So let the whole world bear witness, so I'm about to give credit.
Indeed.
And when I came back from Dakar, I saw Obasanjo. He was then in charge. I said, we need to make this association very strong, because the future of this nation, for the so-called third world, is technology and science. He said, so we need support. And he gave his support. He sent me to the then head of Institute of International Affairs, you know. Professor, I remember we got Professor Jeje, Dr. Jeje, he wasn't professor at the time, a biochemist, to team up with Professor Shikanta Diop. I remember traveling to Latin America, through Latin America, to the blacks section, trying to recruit for this nation scientists and technologists to try and entice them here. I remember going to Peru at the time, Cuba, of course, it's my favorite place. And I know what efforts were really made to build a strong scientific, technological unit here. I was involved in the nuclear program from the, if you like, from the philosophical side. I was invited on it about it, and I was involved in the whole process, which ended up, to my disgust, in splitting that particular endeavor, the theoretical to be, this geographical balance. What sort of nonsense is that? We're talking about science and technology. But they said, no, the calculations will take place based on Ife. Then the physical one will take place. What is this stupid nonsense about? But this is Nigeria for you. This is some of the setbacks which we had. I remember being assailed by some of our expatriate friends who said, we hear you're involved in the nuclear program. I hope you're not going to... I said, please, is nuclear technology only for destruction? Isn't nuclear technology also for peace, for productivity, for energy, and so on? So why should I not be involved in it? I said, please just leave us alone. At that time, they thought we were trying to build up a nuclear bomb to counter apartheid bomb, because they were also trying to build a bomb. They were trying to build a bomb at the time. So they thought we were also trying to say, I'm not for bombing people, but why should we not develop atomic energy? As long as we can do it cleanly, effectively, and even then supply power to neighbors. So I collaborated on so many levels with many governments, without blinking. Once you're on the positive track in a particular direction, I've never had the slightest hesitation in contributing both contact, my own humanities knowledge, so far as it touches on the sciences. And so you're quite right. Each person has, to some extent, in their own way, contributed to the building of democracy. At the same time, literally all, without exception, including Yaradua, who stayed for
the least,
just a short while, contributed to the erosion in many ways, which I can detail if we had the time, to the demolition or deterioration of democracy. I've given an example of closure of the House of Assembly. That is the base. Take the local government, then you move to the House of Assembly. These are our representatives. You take our voices away. You take our voices away, you cheat us, and you turn us into mutes when you lock up the House of Assembly. And you lock it up and you put police there at the expense of our own taxes. We're paying for destroying our own democracy. I find that kind of action really unforgivable. So the negatives, the positives. I've just said this about Jonathan. At the same time, Jonathan will tell you that I had great respect for him, especially the way he contributed by conceding defeat, conceding to his rival. And I say, this is one of his most glorious moments. And so when they wanted to start recruiting again, what is this? Leave the man alone. He has wiped off a large portion of his deficit by quitting the way he did. Why are you wanting to bring him back? You bring him back, that means you bring me out. And then I will say, this man cannot come back. And then, of course, I become the issue. Not the person we're talking about. Not what he did when he was in power. Not when he stopped Oshomole's plane, turned it back in midair because Oshomole was going to campaign for somebody. See, people always forget things like that. And I keep saying, Buhari didn't win any election. Jonathan lost it. but that doesn't sink. You don't understand what that means.
Well, you might have a bit of a conflict this time, Prof. It's well known that one of the current candidates is very close to you. And you referenced it when you mentioned the General Sani Abacha, Nadeko, and so on days.
Yes.
He's more like your son, so to speak.
Yes, you're quite right. There is
there is a bit of...
No, there is a personal aspect, but he will tell you. For instance, is somebody whom there's no harm now revealing. Before I've made this statement, when midway between Buhari's first term, it was clear that it was a disaster. A disaster. And I went and met him. I said, elections are coming. Please, find somebody else. Don't let Buhari get back in office. Not just him, a number of leaders in the APC. I said, this man is a disaster. Just get somebody. I said, we'll work with you. Because I wasn't going to touch the PDP for anything. You can, you're quite, especially the PDP of that time. I said, no politicians, the politician. We spoke for about an hour and a half and so on. At the end, I said, okay. I said, but for me, I'm going to give you my position. I said, let's have some new blood in the place. Let this country have a genuine change, etc., etc. So I say that to tell you on what level we are. We close, and I cannot forget, he's a very good man. It's unfortunate that some over-eager characters keep putting words of praise in my mouth regarding him on the media. Well, Soyinka pays Tinubu tribute. I haven't said a thing about Tinubu since that meeting which I had with him just before the re-election of, a short time before the re-election of Buhari. No, we haven't even met. And yet, on the pages of something, people keep turning me into a praise singer, not knowing that they're doing him a disservice, because then I'm obliged to denounce it and say that this is a lie. I never said that. Much as I would like to say, in addition, look, he's my friend, we're close, as you're right. We worked together against Abacha. We ate together, drank together, plotted together. He moved from Nadeko to Nalicom, which was my own organization, and I know what work he did. I know that he also has a very good brain, And so but when it comes to political issues and choices, my position is still the same as I said to Atiku. When Atiku came to me, I told him, I said, look, you people, it's the time your generation left the stage. I said, that's my position. I'm sorry. And we chatted, and that was it. Same way as I told Jonathan when we met, it's time you left the stage. Because you did this, you did this, you did this. In Lagos, go and ask Jonathan. So it's no different. I still respect Jonathan. I consider him, and I've never forgotten our first chat. I won't tell you. Ask him when we met in the co-hotel what he said to me when we had this chat.
Since you're mentioning that, let me ask about the Inyo conferences.
The what, sorry?
The Inyo conferences.
Inyo conferences.
That you had with General Obasanjo.
Yes.
Do you still have those conferences? Because I'm told that the late Professor Aboyade used to be the one who cooled the tempers after the conferences.
Yes, that's true. Yes.
So when he departed, did the conferences continue? And if so, how did you then temper down the animosity and the rage generated?
No, you see, you talked about Nigeria. You talked about the positives and the negatives. When people talk about Wole Soyinka, I'm very sure that the negatives will be heavy, but there will be a voice or two also who say, but wait a minute now. Didn't they also? So all of us, we're mortals, we're human beings. My problem with Obasanjo has been very straightforward. He likes to put people down to boost himself up. I'm not going to say more than that. And in the process, he sometimes utters deliberately untruths.
You wrote a book about that.
We talked about history. I'm a student of history. I'm a respecter of history. And when I have been part of a history, I cannot sit down and be silent when that part of the history is distorted. That'd be most irresponsible of me as a creative person, as an intellectual, as a public intellectual, and as an activist. So I'm not going to say more than that. That's the only problem really I've had. Well, we used to fight, make it up. His wife, the late Stella, called me uncle until the day. Obasanjo used to steal my apparel when I went hunting and I took the apparel. When somebody steals apparel from you, it means you are friends. Because no enemy come and steal my apparel, I'll get away with it. So, he's a very, let me pay him this compliment. I'm 88 years now. Yes, I have. Oh, it's gone.
Yes, it's gone. You're 88.
Let me use this opportunity. It's not a question of mellowing. It's a question of truth when opportunity comes to say that he's actually a very bright person. He's a bright person. He's a likable person. He's a clown also. But then he's a very cunning clown. He knows how to use clownery to cover some devilishness. These are some of the characteristics which fascinate me about Obasanjo. And he comes up with good ideas, even outside office, when he's not trying to put down his predecessors. Like, for instance, he intervened in this security issue, which should be the concern of everybody. And when I got a letter from him inviting me, I accepted right away. I couldn't attend, but I sent a memo about what I think should be done. And he wrote back and thanked me. And this, for me, should be the kind of relationship between people. Some of my best friends, we quarrel, I don't speak to them for about a year. And I'm talking about very close friends. I can cite one instance where for about 1.5 years, we didn't speak to each other. Because they did something which I found not right. And that was it. But eventually, we came back again. Isn't that how human beings should be? You can't all be smooth
all the time.
There must be a time when you curse each other out thoroughly. And if the event which caused this is public, then the cursing out has got to be public. It cannot be in private. But the private thing you can handle on a private level. That's all I'm guilty of. And if you want to crucify me for that, I'm ready.
Professor Soyinka, it's been a privilege and an honor to speak with you. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's our program today. We would, of course, like to hear from you on the conversation. Our social media handles are right there on your screen. You can also listen to this and previous episodes of the program via our podcast. Please visit our website, channelstv.com/podcast to get started. I am Ladi Akeredoluale. Goodbye.